Okay, welcome. Everybody can hear me, I believe. Again, welcome to the Arts and Algorithms Symposium. We have 6 very able and willing and talented artists in their own right. Some of them will call themselves technologists and programmers and mathematicians, but I'll let them introduce themselves. First of all, I'm Ben Noel, and I am the Executive Director of the Florida Interactive Entertainment Academy. That is at the University of Central Florida. It is not located on the campus. It's located in about 114,000 square feet in downtown Orlando. And it is a graduate program in film and digital media, specifically video games and technology. My background, I grew up here in Florida, Central Florida. I spent 10 years in Austin, Texas, and I spent the last 10 years back here in Florida helping build studios for electronic arts and EA Sports here in Florida in the past 7 years working with UCF building the graduate programs. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll start with Neil down at the end. Oh, Nathan, sorry, Nathan down at the end, and he'll give a little bit of history of himself.
Thank you, Ben. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today with you. I'm excited to participate in this. My name is Nathan Selikoff. I am a visual artist and programmer based in Orlando, Florida. And I really enjoy combining mathematics and programming and interactivity in the work that I make. So often I'm creating interactive sculptures or audiovisual installations or performances or experiences, although I also work with traditional media, including cardboard, a lot in the last couple of years. I just like to have fun. I like to play. I like to learn how to make things and combine things in unusual ways. Thanks.
I'm David Montgomery. I'm from Fernandina Beach, Florida. Graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in digital arts and sciences, and have gone on to create experimental short films based on recurring patterns in nature. I think I gravitate toward nature for subject matter to try to stay sane and balance the hours in front of the computer with sort of, a little bit of an escape.
Hi, I'm Clifton Stewart. I'm brought over the film festival and curated the exhibition of holograms and lenticulars. My background's originally in fine art, and then I went into photography and script writing, working for independents in TV in the UK. Latterly, I'm now working in fine art, lens and electronic media at one university, and I also teach screenwriting and media production at another university. And I'm sort of particularly interested in the creative use of new technology. So it's how people, come up with ideas, use those ideas, and develop those ideas suitable for distribution as short film or gallery work or whatever their sort of creative processes take them.
The light came on. Hi, so my name is Martin Richardson. I came over with Clifton from the UK to put the exhibition on. I'm basically responsible for the holograms and some of the 3D stuff you've seen in the bank down the way. My day job is as a professor at MONTFORT University in Leicester, and I'm responsible for three-dimensional holographic research. I run a program over there which looks at how we can apply and use digital media in a meaningful way, which can be applied to the real world. So I wear 2 hats, and one of the hats is an artist, the other one is as an applied scientist. That's me.
So hello, my name is Daniel Kovach. I'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I'm a native of Florida, specifically Melbourne, Florida myself. I went to Florida Institute of Technology and got my master's in applied math, so I'm a mathematician. I'm an information theorist. Specifically, I study artificial intelligence and machine learning. I also teach at Eastern Florida State College, so I'm a professor as well. So my specialty as far as art is concerned is digital art, specifically fractal and nonlinear art. I think that it's not only is it an awesome outlet for me, but I feel that it's kind of important to inspire future generations to get interested in technology and interested in math and interested in digital arts, and hopefully that one of these days they can do it better than I can.
Hello, my name is Mark Franz, and I teach at Florida Atlantic University. in Boca Raton and just recently Davie, Florida. I received my master's from Ball State University and then a second master's, a Master of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And I create interactive artwork, interactive installations, performance and sound art. I also create commercial animations and experimental animations.
Okay, thank you. And we are going to go ahead and ask a few questions, and each of the panel will have an opportunity to chime in on each question, but we're going to direct them at specific people off the bat. So Nathan, first, given that photographer Andreas Gursky has sold a digital image for $4.3 million, do you think digital art, and art that has been manipulated intentionally this way, has now come of age and is being treated as seriously as more traditional art forms?
So, raise of hands, who is familiar with Gursky in the audience? Okay, that's totally fine. Like I had to look up his stuff as well. Okay, so Gursky did sell a digital image for $4.3 million, and it's a very simple kind of landscape. It almost looks like you shot part of the intercoastal waterway with some maybe grass in front of it, and like the other side, and then the sky, and it's all kind of stretched out. So it's a landscape, and it's very subtle. But what he's more known for is taking lots of photographic imagery and combining it using kind of collage or montage into these really complicated, visually complex photographs that are then printed very large, lots of detail, interiors of stores, and I don't know, all sorts of different things like that. So, in terms of the value of digital art and the value of art in general, in my observation, what I've learned about this is kind of like an art market, like the big A art market discussion. Paintings have historically been valued the most because they're one of a kind, and a lot of people who, there's some people who buy art as investment, and scarcity is really important for that. And there's a lot of people who buy art because they make an emotional connection to it. But the Gursky in particular was, I think I was reading, was, one of 6 that he printed of that particular image. And the other 3 images were in museum collections, and the other 2 were in private collections. So I think this was maybe one of 2 that was even available. So, scarcity is a big part of that discussion. And in terms of digital art, art that's been made on the computer and or is displayed on the computer often can be infinitely reproduced, and an artist has to kind of decide, am I going to do something like Gursky did and make a limited edition and therefore try and fit into the art market and raise that up? Or am I going to embrace the nature of the technology and let it be open source and let it be kind of infinitely reproduced? So in general, in terms of the art market, the big A art market, digital art has a long way to go. They just had an auction this week that was organized by Tumblr, the social media network, and Philips, the electronics company, on behalf of Rhizome, which is a really important organization that's been supporting digital art for a number of decades. And I think they sold a number of artists' work. This is things like websites that are artworks, interactive installations, things like that. And it was maybe $100,000 worth of art. So it's just a totally different scale versus paintings and Gursky photographs and things like that.
Anybody else? Clifton?
I think it's really interesting. In fact, North America, particularly at the moment, are investing quite a lot of money in paintings. In digital photography. The other photographer I can think of is Gregory Crewdson, who works on quite large-scale prints. So it seems to be the photographs that are being invested in, or the digital images, are quite large images. And I also think it's difficult for an artist working in the digital media to limit themselves to one. So even Gregory Crewdson does editions of maybe 6 or 10. So I think, they have to limit themselves and not think, after another 10 years, I'll just rattle off another 10 prints of this. They have to sort of say, no, it exists in an edition of 3 or an edition of 6, which is a bit more like traditional printmaking, where you have an edition. And I think maybe that's the way it would go, or it seems to be starting to go, where you are saying, no, you own that, and there are only going to be 50 copies or 10 copies. But it seems to be, in order to sustain quite a high value of investment, has to be much lower numbers in terms of a digital art at the moment, or it has to be a 3 or a 6, or probably less than a 10. Anything more than that, and I think the figure drops considerably, really.
Along that same line, can a digital image of a location or a scene hold the same artistic and aesthetic value as a painting of the same location or scene? Mark, can you help us on that?
Yeah. So this goes along, I think, really well with the first question, because what we're really talking about with digital art is using it as a tool, and it's always really been seen as just a new piece of technology, and technology has always been an intrinsic piece of art and artwork creation. So this can go back to Warhol making screen prints, which was seen as a commercial mode of making art. And then Jeff Koons and Murakami, they're making artwork now that is very technological. And one of the things that I think is really important about creating artwork in the digital age was written by Walter Benjamin. He wrote a piece called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, and he talked about the aura of artwork, and he talked about an artwork's authenticity. And if you can recreate those two things in digital art, I think that you can do as well as any tool that you can use.
Thank you. Martin, okay. Has the internet and artists using digital materials made it easier to collaborate across borders and continents, or has this become a problem with work being more likely to be used without copyright and original ideas plagiarized more easily?
Okay. I have to say that my initial response to that question is that the question is flawed. Okay, because the key to all this debate is what is digital, and what does it mean to us, and how is it going to affect all of our lives in the future? I think that's probably the more poignant, question we have to start asking ourselves. And of course, if you're involved in digital media, copyright is always going to be a major problem. But perhaps we should be looking more at the nature of interactive digital art, because it seems to be the direction it's going into. And it reminds me of an essay I once read by Roland Baves, which was about authorship, and it comes back to what you were saying earlier. And, if you're involved in interactive digital art, the art doesn't exist until the person viewing it is interacting with it. So somehow, the viewer becomes the author, right? Because the art doesn't exist until we're becoming interactive with it. So I think there's the dismantling of the value of art, and which is a good thing, because when you see paintings selling for $150 million, I think it's pretty obscene. So we're moving into a more democratic, I think, questioning era, where you can be truly creative with what you're putting out there and sharing with it, which can only be a good thing. That doesn't really go very far to answering your question, but that's because the question was flawed. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great answer. I think people can find better use for $150 million, or maybe we buy 150 digital pieces of art. Okay, Clifton, given the proliferation and accessibility to digital technology from mobile phones to tablets and everything in between, should there be more work done to encourage digital artists and support these emerging media?
I think what the great thing about digital technologies, particularly can exist from a mobile phone through computers to whatever, is the sort of accessibility to experiment within it, and the number of sort of apps that are proliferated where people can actually cross-platform and share things between them is giving people more, I think, ownership of the medium itself, which has come along really quickly. It's about like texting took off massively, yet nobody knew it was going to take off like that. Facebook as well to some extent. So I think giving people the means to the technology to experiment, people will make use of it, and they will appreciate what is happening out there. I think it becomes a bit more then a bit more tainted when, you know, Facebook and YouTube or whoever then owns copyright of the work that is put on their sites, which actually harks back a bit to the earlier question. So from people's point of view, I think it's really great because everybody can be an artist, everybody can take images and show them to their friends. From a corporate point of view, it's kind of the opposite because they really don't have ownership of what's going on out there when they would like it. So I'm all sort of for people sort of breaking the rules, experimenting, playing around with it. You know, Instagram suddenly becomes massive. I know Instagram will be around for a couple of years, and something else will come along. And you know, it's people coming through, getting access to all that pieces of kit, photographing their cats, whatever they want to do with it, but just using it in a really creative way, which then in turn makes them appreciate the kind of things that are going on here more immediately. That, you know, there's no steep learning curve. It's an emotive response to what you see, and I think people are much but keener now to actually accept digital and media art because it is basically the world that everybody's living in, and they're sort of responding to that in this sort of positive way.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, Nathan.
I think maybe it's a double-edged sword because as everyone has similar access to these types of tools and is bombarded with digital imagery day after day and hour after hour, maybe the idea of lingering on an image or lingering on a film and taking the time to appreciate it becomes more and more difficult. And maybe it also becomes more difficult to assign value to something that you can find similar corresponding things to for free. You know, there's so much we can find free through the internet that it becomes a little bit of a problem for individual artists to learn how to support their own work. You know, you find a lot of people producing work and distributing it online and having to be really creative about how they're going to support their careers, whether that's through teaching or producing physical work and just showing documentation of that online, or, you know, different things like that, making up new ways to do things. Like there's one of the artists in the auction I mentioned earlier, Raphael Rosendahl. He basically sells URLs to his websites, and so he'll make a little interactive website in Flash or HTML5, and he'll say, okay, what I'm actually selling to you in the contract is the URL, and the URL contains the kind of permanent home or location of this interactive artwork, and that you get to be the person that owns that, but everyone still gets to see it. So, I mean, there are artists being really creative about overcoming some of these problems, but I think we do have to think about, you know, maybe it can be a double-edged sword, I would say.
Agree. We know in the video game industry, a lot of young people think today that they're going to go out and make a handheld mobile game that they can make in a matter of weeks and get it up on a store, but they don't realize until they realize they need to sell about 300,000 or 400,000 downloads to make any money.
I just read an article about streaming music and sort of the idea that it's great for the person that needs to get their name out there, but at some point when the artist is concerned with making a sustainable living, they've started to pull out of some of these streaming services that offer the more minuscule per download fees and look toward becoming artists that participate in something closer to scarcity, album sales and shows and things than what that streaming sort of represents, that availability of services like Spotify. And the direction you went with that last question, I made a few notes on how, like, I think there's two ends of this spectrum. There's an artist that I've followed, a filmmaker I've followed fairly closely named Nina Paley, and she goes all the way with ideas like Creative Commons and relinquishing ownership, and you can take and remix any of her work, and I think she has had some fellowships and grants and supported herself that way. And then one of her biggest films was Sita Sings the Blues, which she had a lot of problems trying to use old music that was still under various forms of copyright. It kind of pushed her to an extreme because it was going to cost her tens of thousands of dollars to distribute her film, where she had a really personal connection to the music, and felt like if she wasn't going to use it in her film, it was just going to be buried in a basement of some studio that all it represented to them was intellectual property, and that they could lock it away because they owned it. So I think when you take that approach, or when you're working with digital, so there's her approach, and I think if you want to do that, a lot of artists are getting support from big tech companies. There was a partnership between was it Google and Tate Modern that allowed some digital artists to create a piece of work that had a internet interface, and so I actually don't know a lot about the other extreme from Nina Paley, but I know that there's these other digital artists, and they're engaged in these, like, one of the best portals to find out about new media artists is a site that's sponsored by Intel and Vice Magazine called the Creators Project. And I think they're sort of almost to the point of funding artists to a point where they can make a sustainable living. But it's with that sort of sponsorship, which presents its own issues.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, is there a sense that young people as digital natives are accepting digital art on an equal basis as the more traditional art forms, and so see digital technology as merely another artistic tool available to them for expression, a digital camera alongside a paintbrush, for instance?
So I have a kind of interesting commentary because a lot of school groups came through to see some of my artwork, different ages. And so I asked the kids, I always ask the kids, how many of you guys like math, right? So with the little ones, third grade, second grade, and so forth, 75% of their hands go up. They really like it. They're really passionate about it. Then he asked the sixth graders, well, how many of you guys like math? And, maybe 10% or so. You ask the high schoolers that question, they start laughing at you. And then, because I teach at Eastern Florida State College, I ask the adults who are coming back to me for graduating, continuing courses and whatever, the same question. They get angry. So they get physically, and you can see them get worked up. It's like they're just waiting to jump over their chairs and pop me one just because they have to be here to get maybe, I don't know, whatever, $2,000 a year onto their salary or whatever. So then I asked the kids, how many of you guys use Google? How many of you guys like to use a computer? Everybody's hand goes up. It always goes up. So I make a point to say, well, for me, that was still kind of an option when I was your age to get to know these tools and get to use them. For you guys don't have that option. And what I can see is that these kids are awesome at all these different tools, using the Google and be able to pull out their iPad. I have a buddy, he's got a kid who's like, 1 year old, and he's sitting there flickering on the iPad like better than I can. So these kids are awesome tool users, and they're really awesome at using these things. The issue is I'm starting to wonder about their ability to build the tools, because I have a lot of people. Obviously, I teach math, so I have a lot of people having problems with the course and so forth. And so I asked some of them. I said, what's the issue with my is it my teaching? What's going on? And they say, well, you teach so differently from what we're used to. And so I said, well, how so? So it turns out that these kids are basically taught to just sit in and fill bubbles all day. I mean, I don't know. It's been a while since I've been in public school, but that's not the way to stimulate thinking. That's not the way to teach people how to think. That's not the way to stimulate creativity at all. And so the worry is that they're going to be able to use what I put in front of them in a very, very narrow framework to maybe make a picture or something like that. But I fail to see how we're stimulating them to actually do something new. And I think that that's the real issue, is not using tools to do different things. I use a variety of image processing software to basically take, some of my fractal or nonlinear art from the table from my Mac to a 4x4 image that's fully processed, and the colors are really brilliant and everything. There's a lot of different layers of image processing, and I'm sure all you guys here have a similar repertoire of tools. And these kids, I've heard of almost every single one of them. So the tool usage and them being able to use it, that's not the problem at all. But I really think that, hopefully some of my artwork and hopefully them hearing me speak a little bit about what I can do with my companies and my programming based on this knowledge, hopefully that will, inspire them to learn more, a little bit more than just filling in bubbles and circles all day.
Well, that's an interesting question. Does anybody else want to follow up about the digital natives?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Daniel. And so when I was talking to the students as well, I made a point to talk about programming languages at a pretty low level, and to mention things like the Raspberry Pi, which is a little $35 computer that started in the UK and has really gained a lot of popularity because there's certain things like this, and I see a lot of good activity happening in the hacker space, maker space, do-it-yourself kind of community, to open up kids to the methods and means of creating tools, building tools, and empowering them with that knowledge to say, oh, I don't just have to be a consumer of content, I can be a creator of content too. And I'm sure, Ben, you guys deal with that in the video game world as well when you're talking about user-generated content for video games and kind of empowering people to be more than just a consumer of information.
One more point, if I may. This iPad actually has the computational power, actually more so than a Cray computer in 1995. Now, that was the #1 supercomputer back, less than 20 years ago. And I think, to follow up with Nathan's point, I think it's a shame if we don't teach them how to take advantage of that.
I totally agree, and I think some of it comes with who's teaching. And I think you're starting to see younger teachers come into your high schools. You're seeing younger teachers come into your colleges, and those younger teachers tend to understand the technology. They can break it down, and then from there they can help add pedagogy and curriculum and learning and critical thinking around it. It's one of those things where I think as students we all need to respect the teacher. So it is becoming harder to be a teacher. It's becoming harder to be a student. So we're pushing some envelopes here.
Can I add something? Sorry, I just quickly wanted to add a thought there that we've discussed the technical issues and the math, and touched on the learning process, but nobody's mentioned the ethical policy. If we're really going to pursue the digital rights issue, then you're going to have to also, educate the children as to what you should and shouldn't do within the digital arena. And it seems to me that ethics would be one of those issues.
Yeah, and I totally agree there, and that is going to be more difficult as well. I think our generation, at least I know with my kids, everybody has phones, so kids will run around the neighborhood and take somebody else's phones and send texts and take pictures, and it's all funny to them, and to us parents it's like a tremendous invasion of privacy. So it's a little bit of it's parenting, a lot of it will be ethics, and but I do think this digital native group, this young millennials that are growing up, I do think they're brilliant. I think they're socially more aware than older generations. And so I'm betting on a positive outcome, but I know it won't be easy. Okay, David. Art produced by technology has to work harder to be accepted with a wider population. Should digital art work harder to be accepted by that wider population? Should it have to work harder? Oh, sorry, David. No, this is for David. Yes, thanks.
I think when I was listening to some of the responses to the first questions, and we're talking about art or digital art trying to fit in what Nathan termed like the capital A art market, I naturally tend toward thinking that allow it to be its own thing, because I mean the question we just finished fielding about digital natives and your idea of a positive outlook, The structure of a lot of the networks that a lot of artists are utilizing, the structure of the web, I see ways in which that mirrors natural ecosystems, and a lot of people have like set images of neurons in the web side by side, or you look at cities from above and you look at the layout of a motherboard on a computer. I think in some ways there's some really natural aspects to it that aren't always readily appreciated, and that it can just sort of rest on its own. And where I find sort of a positive outlook, when you start to see, like, when you feel like kids are a little bit too absorbed in different aspects of technology, is in that structure that it has that might allow that generation to have a more natural sort of appreciation of really dense, interconnected things like ecosystems, which sort of our old media didn't really even come close to approximating that structure. So yeah, so I guess I'm trying to say digital media doesn't need to try to be anything else.
I tend to agree. Clifton?
I think absolutely so, and I know with the sort of the fine art students I work with, there are outlets that have always existed, art galleries, digital galleries, projection galleries. But the great thing about what's actually happening here, which I think is particularly interesting to digital artists, is actually temporary gallery spaces, because where digital artists in particular are particularly strong and good, I think, is adapting themselves and their work to a temporary space. It's not a traditional gallery with flat walls, rack lighting, anything like that. When the way the artists can respond to the galleries here is far more immediate, and it feels more exciting about the work, because the work can lend itself to a space more easily. You can adapt the work, you can change the work. When we were bringing the work over here, the space of the building itself becomes exciting. Now, if it was all painting, all print, the artist may think, it's a bit more, we'd like a more traditional gallery space. But I don't think that's necessarily the case at all with artists anymore. When I ran the art gallery in England, it was very much the space for, because we could project, we could hang, we could do anything we want. And it was always, the artists had to prove to me they could use the space. It wasn't a traditional, it was a gallery space, but we didn't want to hang work in a traditional way, so we could project in the ceilings, on the floors, have people interacting with the work. But digital artists want that kind of experience, want to actually have people interact with their work. Sure, it's an emotive response we want them to get from looking at the work, but they also wanted to respond themselves. So I kind of think the work is kind of more malleable than a lot of traditional work, and everybody who's been speaking here, there's a tremendous amount of expertise and excitement about what is available, what is applicable, and everybody kind of appreciates what everybody else is doing. And I think that's one of the sort of interesting things about digital art at the moment, is the way the artists they finish their work, but they finish their work according to the space and the outlook in which that work is going to be seen, so it can be constantly changing.
Good answer. Okay, the last question, and we'll just open it up to the panel. Given the nature of digital files, what are their implications for long-term storage and being able to read such files in the medium and longer term? As an example, the BBC compiled the Doomsday Project in the mid-1980s. It was written to Laserdisc, which is no longer available, and the BBC had to develop software years later to rescue the content.
So I think I can start with that one. I actually love the concept of digital encoding. It's almost like a form of immortality. I mean, of course, barring some theoretical considerations and everything. The issue is how we handle the formatting. So we have all these proprietary formats, and this is one of the many, many reasons that I'm a huge fan and advocate of open source standards, is because, how awful would it be if we were to sit there and compile all the world's history and all the world's data, but we encoded it in some proprietary thing that you had to buy a key from Sony from or something like that, and then 500 years later, we go and try to decode it, and all we get is noise, because we don't have that key and Sony's not around because, the apocalypse happened or whatever. So So it's an issue. It's definitely something to consider when I was building a Linux media server, right? And the reason why I did that is I didn't want to be tied down to the Rokio or whatever the brands are, and so I spent a full day just downloading and all the codecs to be able to translate the MP3s and stuff like that, because they're still this proprietary format. So I ended up just saying, I'll put that off, and I just bought an Apple TV for $99. But I still think that we have a lot of work to do in that front.
Good, Nathan.
Something that's particularly interesting to me is the idea of preserving an algorithm versus the particular expression of that algorithm in this time. So an example of this, there's an iPad app that some of my favorite artists released. I can't remember the name of the app right now, but it's from a interactive group called Bloom. And the iPad app basically takes your music library and visualizes it as a solar system. And it's really beautiful, really interesting. And they just went through a process recently of handing off the source code for that application to an organization that is dedicating itself to maintaining the algorithm, the idea behind the work, the concept behind the work, so that it can continue to be expressed in new technology as new technology comes about. So I think that's an interesting concept to think about, especially in the Art and Algorithms Festival, is oftentimes a lot of the value of the work is in the concept or the idea behind the work, and there might be new ways to express that as technology continues to advance in the future.
That's an interesting answer. You think about movies, and some of the best movies that we've ever, that we all love to see in the entertainment. We talk about scarcity, you mentioned earlier, is there's usually a code. There's some sort of we're looking for a treasure. We're looking for that piece of art. We're looking for that thing that's going to fascinate us. And there's usually some algorithm or code or some sunlight or sundial or something that has to be broken for you to visualize it. If it happens in movies and fantasy for us that way, maybe we're just getting a little bit closer. And Mark, you had a comment?
Yeah, something I think is really important in digital art today, and in all art, is this idea of nostalgia and looking back towards an event that occurred in time, one time. So I think something that can embody that for a digital piece of work is actually playing the software on the intended hardware. So this might be matching up a Nintendo game with the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the antithesis of that would be playing the ROM on your new iPad or something like that. But I think there's something really important about the original piece of hardware.
I agree. The Beatles, my Blue album, it sounded great in CD, and when you took all the noise out, but like my daughter's all upset with me now that I don't have my turntable and we can't find the albums, and because there would be something very, very nostalgic for playing the album with the original needles and listening to the music.
I think there is something really interesting is broad. It also goes down to actually how do you archive the work and how do you store the work and how you keep the work. Sure, everyone here has lost hard drives with photographs on or film files or whatever they are. But even in terms of cloud storage, which is where it's all going to be, cloud storage seems like it's up there somewhere, but it's still on a hard drive somewhere. It's not just out in the ether. That's one of the issues. And I know in the UK there's been discussions because people are not keeping family albums the same way as they used to do, because you don't print the same numbers of photos anymore. Consequently, in the UK and in the USA as well, they have to do these like the world in a day, and at the same time, in every continent, they want everybody to shoot 1 minute of video or take one photograph. Then they archive those, because that is essentially a snapshot. That was happening on a daily basis anyway, from when you would take your photographs and take them to get them printed. It's not happening in the same way. Certainly with digital technology, this idea now of digital obsolescence is creeping in. Most images, JPEGs. Well, will JPEGs be around in 15, 20 years' time? I don't know, but the BBC thought video discs were going to be around forever, and they lasted 10 years, things change, things move on, but I think what they've become a bit more aware of now is this idea of obsolescence, not only of the technology, but of how the files are actually stored and saved. Think about how we can still read those in, 10, 50, 100 years' time. I mean, photographs fade eventually, the same way paintings fade, and paintings can be restored. You can restore digital files, but I mean, you have to start thinking about these things now. And your idea about early cinema, the early silver nitrate film would just burst into flames. So we've lost lots of early cinema. And now they're storing and saving everything as Blu-ray. Well, Blu-rays are disc, and discs will also, they won't last forever. So there is this constant battle of being able to store things for future generations and let them see digital obsolescence, where these things come from. So as artists, we are making the work. But in the back of your mind, you want to think, do I still want this piece of work to be around in 10, 15, 20 years' time? So all that, I think, has to start to be taken into account.
It sounds like Clifton and I are a song and dance routine act, but we're not. This wasn't rehearsed, by the way. I think what we're alluding to is something which, in 1967, a scientist called Francis Moore, who developed the first IBM commercial computer, referred to as Moore's Law. And that's the law where every 7 years technology takes another further advance. Now, it's reaching a point where I think it's 2020, where we're heading to the point where there's so much information available that we're not going to be able to replay it unless we find an alternative method of display, for example. And so the big push now is into photonics, away from digital media. And so we're beginning to see some of the first photonic-driven computers available. So, these issues are all being addressed, and but the problem is going to be this kind of, the Moore's Law problem, which I thought I would share.
We've always had this problem, correct? I mean, when what books, maybe 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, they were putting down the books, and yes, and you go to your country and go to Oxford and places like that, you can see some of those books, and you should see the amount of effort they go to preserve them. So, if we can, I would like to open it up for a couple of questions for the audience, and you can ask any of the panel members directly, or you can just throw it up here, and I'm sure somebody will jump in and help. If anybody has any ideas, thoughts, questions, philosophies. Hello?
That's $150 million. Well, I'd like to think I have a moral responsibility to the world I live in. And when I think of how much good $150 million could achieve in some of the third world countries, I would say that was my ground. Oh, I think art always has been since the Medici days, when Medici was commissioning Michelangelo to produce some of the most astounding artworks. But times have changed, and what I was alluding to is the nature of art has changed. Art is now within everybody's grasp because of digital technology, and it's our responsibility to work with youth to find a way of disseminating that. I believe it was a Japanese businessman. It was a Van Gogh painting, and I have no idea how he made his money. And if I did, I'd probably do the same thing.
Coming from the video game and movie world, CG movies, what was interesting and what we would sell for many years to young artists is you can make $100,000 working with 200 other artists making the same $100,000 to make something very cool together. And hopefully Electronic Arts or Pixar made a couple of $100 million, and a lot of that filtered down to the artists and helped talk other artists into it and accepting different technologies and such. So I will say that the artists that I see in the digital world, and we'll work with hundreds of them at a time, they're very socially aware, and I'm not sure any of them really care for the 150 million. They would prefer to spread it out. I'll let some others jump in on that one, but I would bet it was more of an investment than it was an emotional response.
If I can jump in, I absolutely, completely agree with that. I think that there comes a point where they see the work as being valuable because other people want that work, and it becomes less of an emotional response to that picture, and they want it for personal reasons, as thinking, I'm going to bid more money for that because I know it's valuable. I mean, the Mona Lisa is the best example. You know, I mean, it's tiny. Is that worth $200 million, $300 million? But why is it priceless?
And it's not Da Vinci's best painting. It's priceless because it's been stolen and because everyone wants it and because it's the thing that you go to the Louvre to see.
It accrues over time. Whether all art doesn't accrue over time. I mean, you couldn't really steal the Last Supper, but the Last Supper's been overpainted so many times. It's not the Last Supper anymore. It's lots of other people's different paintings on top of the original Last Supper.
To preserve it, right?
If I can add just one more little comment about the notion of putting a price on someone's emotional response. I think you can turn the question around too, because putting a price on something implies that there's some kind of supply and demand, that there's some kind of scarcity. And I'm not sure that I agree with someone having the right to control the scarcity of emotions.
Thank you for the question. You got them? I see one over here, but okay, let's start right here, right over here on the right-hand side.
My son bought this game called Skyrim, and he said, I said, oh, what's it about? He said, oh, you should get it, it's fantastic. And I said, isn't it like a sword and sorcery dragon kind of game? He said, it is, yeah. He says, but to be honest, I just ride around and look at the countryside because it's so beautifully rendered, it looks so beautifully done. So I think, yes, it absolutely can be considered art, but the same way as a shot in a movie can be considered a fantastically composed and rendered image. It may not appeal to everyone, but there's people who think, wow, Skyrim, you know, I'll go and look at the snow today. You know, I'll go and look at the plains, I'll go and look at those sort of castles. So I think absolutely it can be. And if you look at the credits, it will list art director, the art department. I mean, these people are, you know, they're trained. It's not somebody who says, oh, you can be the art department today. It is people's professional skills.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's a form of art, and you know how I approach that is how I basically describe my creative process. Although I'm not a game designer, you know, I'm a digital artist, and I take algorithms or you know some type of mathematical formula, some type of mathematical system, and really bring it to life in an image. And it's a creative process, just like, you know, very similar to what an artist would do when they sit in front of a canvas, or what a sculptor would do. I like to, you know, bring up, I believe it was Michelangelo who said that the form is already there. It's my job to really extract it from the, you know, whatever he was working with. Yeah, and you know, I look at some of my contemporaries who are into photography, and you know, it's not that difficult to operate a camera. It's not that difficult to push the button. The skill is really all the stuff that comes around that, and all the steps you need to do to take that emotion that you want to convey, or whatever scene you want to communicate, and really bring that from, you know, taking the picture to actually producing the work. And in fact, I tell people what algorithms I'm graphing. I want them to know. I don't want that to be secret, because the issue is that there's so many steps between that start and production that I'm not worried about anybody stealing it. In fact, I want them to try. I want them to do it better. And I think the same can be said for games.
Just another comment on that. I think it's a great question, and I think as humans, we like to compartmentalize things in the world to try and understand them, and so I think we tend to say, okay, well, this is a video game, and a video game is a form of entertainment. It's not fine art or whatever. And I also want to say, the people that are involved in making video games and making films, the artists, the programmers, everyone that fills in all the roles in between, are some of the most talented people in terms of actual artistic skill that are living right now. Often, if, I've known people, I've had friends that work in that industry, and maybe they feel a little bit chided because they're saying, oh, I'm a concept artist for the video game industry, and I can paint, along with the best painters in the world, and yet when I tell people that I work on video games, they might say, okay, well, you're a commercial artist or something like that. So there's definitely some marginalization that happens. But another part of the question is, whose opinion are you wondering about whether the video game is going to be considered a work of art? Is it the fine art critic? Are you, not you specifically, but you in general? Are you waiting for somebody who's writing, art criticism about shows at the MoMA to say this video game is a work of art? That's kind of a different standard than asking, those of us that are sitting here whether we consider, video games to be works of art.
And as watching a lot of having young children now myself, and then watching them come into college and watching their parents, and a lot of the same things happen. Many years ago, most artists I know, when they tell their story about when they told their parents they wanted to be artists and go to art school, there was a lot of hesitation. Well, why not lawyer or doctor or something that can make money? And the parents were obviously looking out for their children, but they were willing to take the challenge. They were willing to look forward. They wanted to explore. Some of the same things happen when kids say, hey, mom and dad, I want to go make video games, and I'm going to go to school to do it. So we spent a lot of time discussing just basically what, electronic arts there's in Maitland, Florida, there's 800 developers, and their average age is 28, and the average salary is $80,000. And they're putting that money back to good use. Few Ferraris are being bought here and there every once in a while, but most of the time they drive Scions. They have very cool little tools with them, but they're dumping their money back into the community. They're coming to help teach at the graduate schools. They're doing Habitat for Humanity, and they actually, 800 actually have the means to do such.
I've got something to admit. Many things to admit, but one of them is I have a passion for Google Earth. I think it's one of the most astounding, pieces of art ever conceived, and it's free, right? And the young lady's question was interesting, because I was thinking, what kind of value would you place on Google Earth? If I had all the money in the world, how much would I be prepared to pay for Google Earth and just remove it from everyone's computers so I had it for myself?
Because it has an emotional response.
Because it has an emotional response, I can own the entire globe. Interesting, huh?
If I had 300 million, I could talk you out of it. So I saw some more hands. Neil?
Sorry, Neil, that was a really complicated question. I have a very simple mind. Okay, I know Guernica, Picasso, so give that to me one more time, would you?
WikiLeaks. Absolutely. I actually, I think in terms of cinema has done it. I can't at the moment think of a single piece of digital art that's had as a profound effect as something like Guernica. I'm not sure whether there has been one.
Guernica was a response to, you know, the war, wasn't it? So let's think about this, you know.
You know, WikiLeaks was a response to the world they exist in. Now, it's you know, lots and lots of things, and some people think, yes, he did it right, some didn't know, but it is not in its own right a piece of art, but in fact, it's just been turned into a movie. So can you consider the movie representation of what happened to a piece of art? But I can't think of an image or a body of work at the moment that has had anything like that kind of impact. But saying that, I'm pretty sure something will come along. It just will, because of the nature of art and how art responds to the society in which we all live in. I think probably yes, although I'm not, whether we're at an early stage, maybe, but it's just a case of the artist coming through, finding the expression and finding the themes, finding, you know, the response to the world they live in. And Guernica was a political response to, you know, political acts. The political, digital political art tends to be online or projection on buildings and things like that. So it is happening, but it's happening probably in more localized situations. It isn't yet happening on a kind of a global scale, but it will happen.
I can't think off the top of my head of something as seminal as the piece by Guernica, but I can say that, you know, with the proliferation of technology, we see a lot of art mirroring what's going on in society, making commentaries on it all the time. I mean, this dates back to at least what I can think of in early TV shows. I used to watch The Twilight Zone a lot with my dad, and you know, this is from the 50s and 60s, and you see embedded in there, you can just tell that they're really making a lot of commentary about the Soviets and that, you know, that political situation. The same was true for the original Star Trek. And now you fast forward the clock a little bit, and now we have all this stuff that's going on in contemporary the news with the NSA, and you know, then there's the government shutdown. Almost immediately, you see sketches made on Saturday Night Live, and you know, South Park episodes and so forth. And the response time is very, very quick. So what we're seeing is this really the societal paradigm change, because instead of maybe perhaps one really seminal piece, you have many, many different commentaries. And you know, you can kind of end the comment with a interesting thought that this is not always good, because the good news about the internet is that everybody has a voice. The bad news about the internet is that everybody has a voice.
I'll recommend one artist to you to look into. He's a young artist named Kyle McDonald, and he's doing a lot of work that reflects on how what our relationship is with technology. So he's done some things like create a key logging program that runs on his own computer, and as he uses his computer throughout the day, it tweets out every 140 characters that he types, regardless of whether he's typing a private email or surfing the internet or you know, writing a journal entry or anything. It'll tweet every 140 characters. And so he'll do some interesting things like that that reflect on the way that we're connected to technology. And he's probably most well known for a project that he did where he brought a little application into Apple stores all across New York City and installed it on the computers in the Apple store, and it would take a picture of people and upload it to the internet. And I think it was called People Looking at Computers. And needless to say, he got in trouble for that. He was visited by, I believe, the FBI or some other organization, had his computer seized and things like that. So I think he's doing a lot of work that's interesting in terms of that realm. You know, in my observation, some artists are interested in specifically engaging in a social or political discussion with their work, and some are just not interested in doing that directly, although you can often talk about the underlying kind of environment that the work is made in and draw those connections even if the artist is not doing that intentionally.
We have time for one more question? Two. Okay, then. right there and then there. Well, first of all, I think we used to have these arguments a long time ago, and they ended up coming back around as filmmakers versus video game and interactive, and versus passive entertainment and interactive entertainment. And I had to agree with the filmmakers. At the time, there was no video game that I thought out there that could make me cry. Yet there were movies that made me cry. So which one was more interactive? Or which one was I interacting with more? So physically, I might be interacting more with a joystick or my mouse or typing on a keyboard, but emotionally, I might be more interactive in the movie. So that's kind of my response to interactivity. It always gets back to me about storytelling. And many times, we said there's a character in the story, there's a character in the movie. In the video game, usually the character is me.
I think it all comes down to the content. And again, we're just seeing technology as a tool and the way that you make something. Something can be as interactive as you want it to be, but it doesn't necessarily make it more emotive. It doesn't make it more emotive than a painting, doesn't make it more emotive than a film. And it all comes down to that aura, the place and time which you experience the work.
One comment I'll make real quick on that is with interactive art that has multiple participants, I would say that is fundamentally different than most people's experience of a painting. So if the nature of the work changes based on the group of people who are interacting with it, so that my interaction with the work affects your experience of it, I think that's fundamentally different than interacting with a painting. But I think it's a really interesting question.
There's a bit of a joke, really, because you interact with the painting when you stand back and you fall over a piece of sculpture. I mean, one of the things I became fascinated with was watching people look at paintings, watching their reactions. So
I guess in that sense, they were affecting your experience of the painting because you're observing their experience of the painting.
One last question in the back.
I think this comes up quite a lot, particularly sort of script writing and narrative, one of the sort of classes I teach in the UK. You can't help but be informed by the world around you and the response to thing you've already seen. So what it used to be, a few years ago, it used to be you have to be completely originality every single stage. Well, it kind of isn't really feasible and possible to do that. But what you can do is you do what's called the active question. You find your way into a story. And you will have seen things or responded to things that may well be out there already, but your take on it, your original take, is your original take on it. It's just a different way you find into telling a story, or if you like, creating, producing a piece of art. There's portraits and there's your portrait. Your portrait is original to you, and it's what you use, how you create, what you bring to that work that makes it yours. And I think it has to come down to if you like, this idea of what is an artist's vision and how people respond to that and what they take from it. That's what I think, anyway.
I know for myself, there was a point in time at which I was somewhat obsessed with coming up with an original idea, especially working in the realm of mathematics and algorithms and things like that. The idea appealed to me of coming up with a new solution or new algorithm that could be used to create new work that no one had seen ever before. And for me, I went through kind of a journey of releasing that and letting that go because it was not moving me to a good place, either psychologically and personally or in my work. So I've experienced kind of, I guess, both sides of that.
Okay, and I think that concludes the panel, but the panel would be glad to take any other further questions you have right down here. And I think we have our mayor up here that wants to say something.
I just wanted to thank the artists, all of you. For those of you who don't know me, and I can't see you all out there, my name is Jim Tolley. I'm the mayor of Titusville. And we are so proud of this whole festival. It has been, I think, a tremendous event. And we're so thankful to have you all here. Both your art, but having you here personally especially, was really great, so that the people attending the festival could talk to you personally about your art. And as I sat out there in the audience and was listening to you speak, I found myself taking notes as to how we could include you in your art in an even better way next year and grow this into something that's even more special and more fulfilling to not only the people who attend, but the artists who are part of it. I think we can make this into a really special annual event, and we thank you for being part of it.
And to close on that, we would like to, I do think this was a great idea. At UCF, we get asked to do lots of stuff. We're at the city of Orlando, the Capitol, legislators talking about films and incentives and digital media and jobs. And they're all very interesting, they're all important, but this is a whole lot more fun when you go to your local community, your local playhouse, whether you're going to New Smyrna Beach or Titusville or Destin or wherever you may go. These small towns that are willing to put forth the effort to do this, they don't have to do this, but they also have high schools and schools around here, and they have young people growing up, and they do want to have those young people, you know, make a difference in their community. And also, again, I left Orlando for 10 years, not because I wanted to, because I felt like I had to for work. So I hope the young people growing up in Titusville don't have to do that, and they have it all right here. So thank you.